Real estate contracts get canceled for a lot of reasons, and sometimes they lead to earnest money disputes. But if we can do a better job of understanding why those cancellations happen and educating buyers and sellers on them, we can avoid most of the problems that come up.
So prevent sticky situations with just a little bit of explanation up front.
Welcome back to Talking Real, brought to you by the Oklahoma Association of Realtors. This is episode 130 of Talking Real, and you are in the studio with your hosts, Jeff and Nabil. And Nabil, how are you today?
I am doing fantastic, Jeff. How are you?
Man, I'm a little tired. Little brain power's fading on me today, and we're doing all right. But man, I don't know. Maybe it's just the cloudy and rainy weather that we've got going on, or just worn out this week, starting out early, but man, a little out of it today.
I kind of like this weather.
You're a weirdo.
Oh boy.
I love the hot and sunny kind of weather. So, but hey, rain's good. So even though maybe I'm a little out of it today, we're going to bring you another excellent episode of Talking Real.
That's right.
We got a few things going on. As everybody knows, we've talked about this. Unfortunately, we have had to make the decision to pretty much cancel all of our in-person events that have been going on. And instead, we're shifting to an online digital format. And that doesn't mean that the things that we're going to do are going to be bad. So they're still going to be awesome. And we wanted to bring you a couple pieces of information of a couple things that we've got coming up. They're going to be pretty cool to be a part of. And you can be a part of those from the comfort of your own home.
That's right. That's the advantage of online meetings and classes and things like that, is you have a little bit of flexibility in terms of how you do them and where you do them from.
For sure.
So the first thing that's coming up are virtual town hall meetings.
Yes.
And this is really cool because these are organized with our congressmen and congresswomen, and they're going to be virtual, so everyone can join in.
Yeah.
Right? You don't have to go to DC to do this.
Exactly. I'm pretty excited about this, to have our own personal town hall meetings with our congressional delegation. Mm-hmm. This is very cool. Again, this is all going to be done virtually, and we're already starting to schedule these out, but we need you to sign up for them if you want to participate. So if you want to get more information about this, you can go to okrealtors.com/events, and we have those on there. Our first one is scheduled for August 6th at, what time is it, like 9:30 in the morning? 9:30 in the morning. Mm-hmm. And this is going to be with Congressman Tom Cole.
Yes.
And so this is our first one, but we're scheduling these out for multiple town halls that we're going to have with all of our various congressional delegation. Mm-hmm. And so we want realtors to participate in this so that we can share the information that's important to us, so they can see that we are invested in good realtor-friendly policy changes and legislation. And so we really hope people can take advantage of that. And so sign up for the first and all the other virtual town halls that are coming up.
Yeah, because when you sign up, that's how you get the login info, because these aren't just publicly posted.
Right.
For Zoom security reasons, which we've talked about.
Absolutely. So, again, this is specifically for our members. This is not just open to the public for anybody to come in and join. This is specific to OAR members. So check that out by signing up at okrealtors.com/events. You go on there, look for the town halls, and there'll be a link there that you can sign up.
That's right.
And you can participate.
Yep. And the excitement doesn't stop there in August.
No, it doesn't. Keep it rolling.
Keep it rolling. Next week on Monday, registration for the OAR annual conference opens up. And again, this is going to be virtual because all the events are now virtual. But like Jeff was saying, this is not just going to be a boring virtual conference, right? It's not going to be the instructor's face on Zoom and they're just talking to you the whole time. This is going to be, if you talk to anyone that took GRI 201, they will tell you how engaging this online class was, because, there's a little bit of production that we're putting behind it with different cameras, the presentation, the fun that the instructors bring with them. It's not going to be boring.
Yeah.
Don't be scared by the virtual conference.
Please, yes. This is going to be a highly polished event with lots of fantastic guests, lots of great information. I think for a lot of people, this is way more convenient than the normal annual conference. One, you don't have to travel. Two, you're still going to get things like continuing education credit. You're still going to have opportunities to learn and do things like that. So I think this is a great opportunity, and we're going to be able to do some new and cool things with the virtual format that maybe we haven't done in the past. And again, we're trying to really increase the polish and make it a really fun, engaging, and interesting event. So that's going to be coming next week, that sign up. So be on the lookout for that. You're going to find that information in your inbox. We'll be talking about it on the podcast. So you're going to have plenty of opportunity to get signed up for that, but look forward to it. It's coming next week.
That's right. And all the information will be posted at oarconference.com.
Absolutely. So get ready to break through the conference that we're going to be having.
I see what you did there.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the theme of the conference.
It is. You may be used to in the past, the Reignite conference.
That's right.
But we are breaking through this year. So that is a new theme, and we're excited to bring that to you virtually in 2020.
So it's a breakthrough year.
It is. Boy, it is
and
something.
Yeah, it's something.
2020 is something. So, it is. And I think that this is sort of an aside, but it is absolutely an interesting year. And that comes with lots of difficulties, but it also comes with lots of opportunities.
Yes.
And so we are trying to take advantage of it to make this a catalyst for change and growth and some new ideas. And so we hope that you will help us break through the noise and the nonsense and the trouble into new exciting opportunities. And we can make that finish up 2020 strong and roll into 2021 ready to go.
That's exactly right.
It's so inspiring. Nabil, how's your investment portfolio doing?
Just like with the ups and downs in the market, I'm riding the wave.
You might wonder why I'm asking Nabil.
They're like, wait, what?
Yeah. Talk about a total 180 change in direction.
This was some interesting bit of news.
This is. Nabil and I have been talking a lot about investing lately, as is everybody else.
Yes.
This really makes sense. It's been very popular this year for people to get engaged with different online investing platforms, like Robinhood, for example, is an app that you can it's super easy to use. You can invest in stocks and such on it, mutual funds, those kinds of things. And it's totally free. And again, simple to use. And people have, interestingly, been shifting I think a lot of income that maybe they would have been betting on horse races and sports and many other things into the stock market. And you may question, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, a survey was done by Bankrate, which you may be familiar. They do a lot of stuff on mortgage rates, those kinds of things. And they did a survey of Americans' favorite investment choice. And stocks have officially dethroned real estate as the most popular long-term investment in 2020. Up until this point, it has overwhelmingly been real estate has been the number one favorite long-term investment based on these surveys. In 2019, in fact, they said 31% of Americans preferred real estate and only 20% chose stocks as their favorite long-term investment. But because the stock market, for whatever reason, the coronavirus has caused the stock market to become extraordinarily popular this year. And it is now 28% of Americans favor stocks as their investment of choice, and real estate has gone down to 26%.
I wonder if they defined long term. Because, right now, obviously, the market took a hit, and which is why a lot of people are attracted to it, being like, it's going to rebound sometime, right?
I heard, buy cheap.
Exactly. And so I wonder if it's like a long-term thinking of 10, 20 years, or if they're like, oh, it'll be back in a year and that's long-term for me,
Yeah,
I don't know.
That's a good question.
Yeah.
So when I looked a little further here, they say that the question was, what is the best way to invest over a period of 10 years or more.
Okay.
And so that's where stocks became the number one choice at 28%, moving up from, 20% in 2019.
Yeah. I mean, wouldn't make sense for long term to be a year.
Yeah. Just kind of an interesting little mindset deal. I think people that traditionally have invested in real estate, I doubt very seriously that they are changing their tune and all of a sudden stop investing in real estate, right? I suspect this is a lot of people who have jumped into the stock market that maybe hadn't really been that invested before.
Because it's become so much more approachable, right? You can just go in, buy a stock or fractions of stocks.
Right.
You don't even have to put the whole thing in. So I think it's just become more accessible and people are doing it.
But certainly thought that was interesting that real estate was dethroned. Again, I think that's probably temporary. I mean, I can't imagine
real estate
that.
will rise again.
Yeah. I mean, that can't be true. But who knows? It's kind of interesting. But real estate is always they're not making any more land, right? But new companies come and go all the time.
Although I would argue Dubai is making new land.
Okay, fair. There are countries who are literally building islands. China is doing the same thing. So yeah, interesting. So that's got nothing to do with anything, but an interesting little survey that we saw and we wanted to share with you.
Yeah, that was interesting.
We did want to talk about a legal issue. I've had a shocking number of legal line questions that have come in relating to cancellation of contracts and disbursement of earnest money. A lot of them.
And it's kind of surprising, would you say? To a certain extent.
Yes. I mean, yes and no. I mean, I think it's not surprising because it's typically an area where there is tension between buyers and sellers. But in that respect, I think that somebody having a question about the contract interpretation, those kinds of things, would primarily come up where there is an area of tension, right? If there's not a problem or a issue that comes up, then why would people ask questions about it? So I guess in that respect, it makes sense. But I see this question coming up over and over and over in various forms, and it comes up quite frequently. So I thought it would be good to just go through just a couple of little issues, not spend a whole lot of time on this, but kind of go through the forms that are used for cancellation of a contract and disbursement of earnest money, as well as just sort of offering up maybe an opinion and some advice on how to deal with buyers and sellers on these particular issues. Just again, because I keep seeing this come up over and over and over.
Yeah.
And where there is that issue of a dispute arising, the more we can head that off at the pass and prevent it from, going beyond, where it needs to, the better, because we don't want to be in situations where our buyers and sellers are frustrated and they feel like they have to go to court and sue each other over earnest money and those kinds of things. So I think the more we can do to make sure that all realtors understand the contract, they understand how cancellation works, and then they can upfront have these conversations with buyers and sellers to sort of set the stage of what the expectations are and how this stuff works, then that will hopefully prevent some disputes coming up on the back end. And then you won't have to write into the legal line and say, well, I've got this problem. You've already fixed it before it ever became an issue.
Yeah, because once things start escalating and snowballing, it's a lot harder to control.
Yeah.
So,
For
all
sure.
right. So let's go through it.
Yeah. So we've talked about earnest money disputes and things like this in the past a little bit, but again, it's been a while, and so I think it's good to bring this up. And first of all, I want to just cover a cancellation. There are a lot of reasons in the contract why the buyer or the seller might be able to cancel the contract, right? And this is different than I just want out of the contract because I don't want to buy it anymore. Right? I just don't want to buy the house anymore. I don't want to sell it anymore.
It has to be like a legitimate reason other than change of preference.
Right. So this is like actually having a contractual right to cancel the contract. The most common one that we see, I think, is probably inspections, right? So the buyer enters into the contract with the seller. Then what happens next? Well, they get their inspections done and they decide at the conclusion of those inspections, they get their reports back and they say, you know what? It's just too many issues. I'm just not interested. And so they want to cancel the contract. And if you're using the standard real estate forms, which is what we're referring to here, people may use different forms, but we're going to be just talking about the standard real estate commission forms because that's most commonly what's used. And so people get their inspections done and the buyer says, I don't want in the contract anymore. I don't want to buy anymore. The contract gives them an essentially unconditional right to cancel the contract unilaterally. And when I use the phrase unilaterally, what am I talking about? That is a term that basically means that they don't have to have anybody, they can do it on their own. They don't have to have the permission of the seller to cancel the contract. It says the buyer, if their opinion is they don't want the house after get their inspections, they can, on their own, without approval, cancel the contract.
And at that point, it could be for any reason in that list of either problems or minor things that might have been found. They could just be like, no, sorry, that's a deal breaker.
Right. There are other scenarios that come up as well. Just a couple of reasons. The next most common one is going to be the financing, right? So they couldn't get approved. They were denied for financing. This would be another one where if they are working with a lender, they've made their application within the correct time period and done everything they're supposed to, but then the lender comes back and says, I'm sorry, we can't approve you. The buyer, again, has an unconditional, unilateral right to cancel the contract. They can say, I'm out because we agreed to this upfront in the contract that if I can't get financing, I get to cancel the contract.
Right.
And they can do that without the seller's permission. They just get to do it. So that's sort of the first thing that is worth mentioning, right? That there's this concept of unilateral cancellation of the contract, that this is not necessarily by agreement. They just get to do it. The contract gives them a right because in those cases, the seller has upfront said, I'm agreeing upfront that you have the right at this stage based on these things that could occur to cancel the contract. Okay. And there's a form for this, right? So there is a notice of cancellation of Oklahoma Uniform Contract of Sale of Real Estate form that the Real Estate Commission puts out. And what you will notice about this form...
It's a mouthful.
It is. So what you'll notice about this notice of cancellation, there's sort of three boxes here. One is the buyer's notice of cancellation. One is the seller's notice. And the other one is a buyer's conditional cancellation that basically they say, I'm going to cancel the contract unless you give me some extra time to do some inspections, that maybe they need some additional things. They say either I'm going to cancel it or you're going to give me extra time. What you'll notice about these first two, though, is that they only have one party signature. Okay, so the buyer's notice of cancellation based on treatments, repairs, and replacements, only the buyers sign it and then they deliver it to you. There is no accepted by the seller because they don't have to have the seller's permission to cancel the contract. When they deliver that notice of cancellation, that contract is canceled.
It's done.
It's done. You have delivered the notice. You have signed it as the buyer. It's done.
There's no agreeing to it. You don't have to think about it. It's over.
Correct. And so that's step one, is we've now got this established that there's a right to cancel the contract. The contract is done. So what does that mean? Well, that means that, now the seller can go put their house back on the market. They can sell it to somebody else because you've told me you're canceling the contract. I'm moving on. We're going our separate ways.
Go to the next buyer, whatever it is.
Correct.
Right.
Now, there's a separate way to cancel the contract, and this is by consent of both parties, right? And there may be reasons that this does occur, is that both parties decide, we don't want to be a part of the contract anymore. We're going to go our separate ways, and we're going to do that by consent. And in that circumstance, the buyer and the seller, just like they can modify the terms of the contract and amend it at any time, does require approval of both parties, because there isn't just a right to unilaterally cancel the contract for any reason whatsoever at any time. There's specific reasons outlined in the contract why you might be able to do that. But the parties could at any time also decide, we're both going to agree and sign off and say, we're just canceling the contract and moving on. But here's the issue and the real rub that happens when you've got the buyer that's wanting to cancel the contract based on inspections or financing. And this is the earnest money, right? This is where we see the disputes arise.
It's always where money is involved.
Right. And the first one was where I kind of mentioned that when the party says, I'm canceling based on inspections, and they deliver that notice of cancellation, it's my opinion, the seller can rely on that and say, okay, well, the contract is canceled. You've given me notice. I'm going to go list the house. Mm-hmm. But then you still got this earnest money to deal with. And there's a second form that is used for this, and it's the release of contract and disbursement of earnest money. So this is kind of a weird thing, and this gets kind of confusing, because what this contract does is it's a release between both parties that both sign off on it. and they mutually agreed to release each other from all further obligations, and the contract is null and void, and everybody signed off and agreed to it. And then it also directs somebody's holding the earnest money, and it's going to be given to party X once they've signed off on it. So what happens is when you've got the buyer has decided they're going to cancel the contract based on the inspections, it also says they can get the earnest money back. They get a refund of their earnest money. And this is where we see this like dispute arise, because now the seller is mad for some reason. And so they don't want to,
because they didn't buy the house, obviously.
Right. So they don't want to sign off and agree to release the contract or release the earnest money. So what happens then, right? This is where we come up with these disputes. And this is where I don't have like a great answer for you, because what's happening is people are putting earnest money with title companies, right? And the title company is saying, well, I'm not releasing the earnest money until I've got something from both parties that says
consent from both parties, even though the contract's been canceled by one party.
Right.
And that's perfectly fine. Unless they have the sign off to release the money, they're not doing that.
Right. And this is where I don't love the way that the contract is done in some respects, because I'm seeing this happen all the time where one of the parties is just upset and they're going to refuse to release the earnest money just because they're mad. And so this is where I kind of wanted to like have a maybe some advice or conversation about setting the standards up front about how these cancellations work, because it's, in my opinion, very unfair to a party that is entitled by the contract to have their earnest money refunded and have it withheld by the other party simply because they don't like what happened, right? And that's different than, no, I think that party breached the contract, which means I'm entitled to the earnest money, versus I'm just upset because you wanted to cancel the contract.
Right.
And I think that is a very sad thing that happens a lot, like way more than it should. And so I think this just bears having a little quick conversation about setting these standards up front.
But, so they're upset, they're not releasing the earnest money, whatever it is. Eventually, because the contract dictates, that money is going to go back to the buyer, right? They're just delaying that process.
They are. Exactly. And here's what has to happen, right? Because the contract says that any dispute arising out of the contract has to be mediated. So you now have to go through this process of where the buyer and the seller then have to try to mediate this issue. And what'll happen is one of the parties refuses and says, I'm not going to mediate. Well, then the only recourse you have at that point is to file a lawsuit. You would file what's called an interpleader action, that somebody is holding money that one of us is entitled to. And now you got to go to court to get that issued. And what would practically happen is you would go to court, and the judge would look at the contract and say, well, this contract requires mediation. Have you mediated yet? And they say, no, they refuse to. And the judge is going to say, well, you agreed up front that you have to mediate. Go mediate. So now you got to go get with a mediator, do the mediation. And then when that fails, if it does fail, then you got to go back to court, and then the judge will, if it was a legitimate cancellation reason based on inspections, for example, they're going to give the money to the buyer. Or, again, the buyer's going to have to file the lawsuit, and the seller's just say, well, I'm not going to sign off on it. But to get it released, they're going to have to go file that interpleader action just to get a court to rule on it if the seller just never shows up. But they still have to go through that cost and the headache and the expense.
Yeah.
When, again, the only issue here is the seller was mad. Not that they had a legitimate claim to it. They were just ticked off for some reason because there was a report that said something was broken in their house that they didn't think was broken. I mean, because this is really what happens, right? Like, I'm not trying to be like, talking down about anybody, but this is like, these are real scenarios that happen all the time.
Right.
And
it's like, oh, that's not wrong. It's fine. This report must have been wrong. Or
yeah.
something, right?
And I'm going to refuse to release the earnest money because of that.
So at that point, do the sellers have some sort of option or fallback? Because say the buyer saw this report and they're like, all right, we don't want it anymore, right? Do the sellers be like, okay, let me get you another inspection because I believe that's incorrect or it's maybe exaggerated?
Sure, the parties always have the opportunity to discuss and negotiate and mediate and all those kinds of things, all this negotiation that occur to try to get whatever the issue is fixed. And that may be, listen, I think that was wrong. Let's have somebody else that's more of an expert in that specific field inspect it. Yeah, you can absolutely do all those things.
Because ideally the parties have open communication, and it's not all of a sudden I'm canceling the contract. It'll be like, hey, I think we're going to cancel because of this reason.
Right. And that's what happens in most cases. I mean, in most cases, there's a list of issues that there's a problem with, and the buyer submits those on the TRR, and they decide, yeah, we're going to fix these things or not. And we're going to negotiate and get those things fixed. But it's in this instance where they want to cancel, and, again, this fight happens. So I'm basically here to say that it's incumbent upon realtors to understand what the reasons for cancellation are, and to make sure that your clients understand those upfront as well. Don't wait to explain why the contract might get canceled until when that actually happens. They need to understand this upfront. So it will really, really help with these issues if you set the stage up front. If when you have, whether it's at the time you're entering into a listing agreement with the seller, or at the time the buyer's making the offer, or whatever the case is, that you're having this discussion up front, especially with sellers, because I find it happens most often where the buyer wants to cancel and the seller doesn't want to release the earnest money, that the seller gets upset. And so if they understood up front, like, listen, they're going to get inspections done, and you have to understand that if they aren't happy with the results of the inspection, for any reason virtually, they can cancel the contract and they get their earnest money back. We have no right to dispute that. They have an unconditional right to do it.
It's like a breakup. It's not you, it's me.
Yeah. And if, listen, they're going to want to get financing. And if for any reason whatsoever, they can't get financing, if that falls through, even if it's 2 days before closing, right? Like if they've done everything they're supposed to, if they can't get financing and they're denied, they have an unconditional right to cancel the contract and get their earnest money back. We have no basis for disputing it. They are not breaching the contract by doing it. We are agreeing to that up front. And if they understand those kinds of issues up front, they're going to be less likely to, yes, they may be disappointed, but they're less likely going to get mad and feel like the buyer's trying to pull a fast one.
Right.
And I think this goes back to one of the issues, like, you guys know, Nabil and I love technology. We love the speed of doing business the way it can be done now. But with electronic signatures and email and text messages, we don't do as good of a job in most cases of sitting down and talking to clients about what each line in the contract means, what every word means, what every paragraph means, so that they understand. And these things, now they're not getting this explanation until the cancellation comes. Right. So the buyer sends over the cancellation, and now you have to have that conversation with them. And they didn't even know this was something that could happen up front. I think there's a lot of that goes on.
Yeah, that makes sense, because you're not, sometimes, if not a lot of times, you're not there flipping through the pages, right? And just as you're flipping, you talk about something. Not now, you just send it, they sign it, get it back. Ideally, you're still walking them through it. But I know sometimes with, like you're saying, the speed at which things process, sometimes you're just in a rush, and the buyer or the seller is like, yeah, I just got to get this done right now. And, you're off to the races.
Absolutely. So, what's the point of this? I mean, one, it's to refresh your memory on, go take a look at these forms, take a look at the contract, and make sure that you understand why each party can cancel the contract, and that you have a conversation up front very early on with your clients about, you need to understand how this cancellation works and how earnest money actually works. Now, if one of the parties breaches the contract, and we see this happen a lot too, where the buyer just decides, you know what, I've changed my mind. That's all it is. I've just changed my mind. I don't want to buy it, and now I want out of the contract. That's either you got to do it by agreement, or they're breaching the contract.
Right. And at which point, hopefully the buyer knows that they're forfeiting their earnest money.
Right. And so having those conversations up front, so everybody understands these are the reasons that one of the parties can cancel the contract. And this is what happens if they do that with the earnest money, that you don't have a right to dispute it or anything like that. So have those conversations up front, set that understanding up front, so that there isn't a dispute, because then we're left with buyers and sellers being ticked off and upset with each other and mad at their realtors and mad at the other party's realtors, and everybody's in a much worse place unless we can kind of head this off up front. So, you know, what was I saying? Cancel culture is kind of a thing right now.
Cancel culture, yeah.
And so when you're dealing with the cancellation of a contract, you know, let's do a good job at that, because I think this is one of those where we can really do a great service to our clients to make sure that they understand how all that works.
Words of wisdom.
Something. It's something.
Words of something?
Yeah. So as always, if you have issues that do come up, definitely send me a message. You can head on over to okrealtors.com/legal and send in a message to the legal line and try to help you out. Again, this is one of the most common scenarios that I see coming up. And so just wanted to kind of raise that as heads up. This is something that happens all the time. If you haven't experienced it yet, you certainly will. And I suspect most people have dealt with a cancellation at one time or another, and just hope that they can all start going a little bit better, because it causes everybody a little stress and anxiety when they don't go well.
Yeah. And if you have a interesting cancellation story, we'd love to hear those.
Absolutely.
So send us an email, podcast@okrealtors.com, and tell us about your story. Maybe that'll help another realtor down the line prevent theirs.
I would love to hear those stories. I really would.
Yeah. If you haven't done so yet, hit that subscribe button so you know when the next episode is released, and share this podcast with a fellow real estate enthusiast and share the knowledge.
Please do. We appreciate you coming back week after week and joining us here on Talking Real. And until next time, we'll see you next Tuesday on Talking Real.